Today, we're going to talk about The Acolyte, Episode 8.
Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
Well, we got the final, heartbreaking episode. Specifically, it was heartbreaking that human beings could write something this bad. And I have to hand it to them. My expectations were extremely low, and it was much, much worse than I expected. There's actually something interesting about that, but I'll get to that in a bit after a brief summary of, I was going to say the plot, but let's just say what happens. I'm not sure that this qualifies as a plot. The episode begins with Sol talking to May in sickbay, but nothing comes of this because May is impervious to reality. Also, the writers have clearly deserted Sol in this episode, which we first see as Sol not having bothered to put May's arc welder/droid friend out of her reach when he handcuffed her to the bed. He just left it in her pocket, so she used it to get free and stun him, then steal an escape pod. Well, not an escape pod, an escape ship. So we get a really stupid chase through the Orion's Ring style rings of a moon. That's way too close to Brendok. Oh, yeah, when Sol jumped to light speed in the previous episode, he went to Brendok. Because, of course he did. And somehow during this chase, Basil, one of the worst rodent characters in the history of cinema, disables Sol's ship for some reason, so, because the writers don't understand how momentum works, it crashes into May's ship in front of him. Disabling it made it go forward. And her now disabled ship falls out of the sky onto the surface of Brendok about half a mile away from the old giant stone fortress, which is surprisingly intact for having burned down. And, by the way, this is the second time that a ship falling out of space landed gently on the ground. I actually laughed out loud when the ship bounced like a book tossed onto a couch. It's funny how allergic the writers are to writing things that make sense. It would have been completely fine to just have her fly to the planet's surface, which would have made more sense with the character motivations anyway. So, they both crash land on Brendok, and Sol turns on his navigation beacon, and Master Vernestra, back on Coruscant, is informed he turned it back on, and apparently it takes a few minutes to get from the Wookiee Jedi planet, which is supposedly like in the outer rings of the galaxy, to Coruscant, and also a few minutes to get from Coruscant to Brendok, and it also only takes a few minutes to get from Unknown Planet, the one the unnamed Sith played by Manny Jacinto lives on, to Brendok as well. Oh, which reminds me, Osha and Manny also go to Brendok because Osha saw May attacking Sol with a lightsaber in a vision that she, Osha, had while she was wearing Manny's helmet, at the end of episode 6. Oddly, during this vision, it also affected Manny, and I think temporarily gave him pure black eyes before he plucked the helmet off of her. Don't worry, it's never explained and doesn't mean anything. So, at Brendok, everyone meets up at the giant stone fortress which burned down and exploded, but is still completely intact. That makes as much sense as stone burning, I guess, so at least it's consistent. Also, in the last 16 years of the place being abandoned, the sum total of the changes are a little dust and a few extra bushes, despite the whole reason the Jedi showed up on the planet at all being that the planet became covered in plant life way faster than it should have been after a catastrophic accident because of possibly a vergence in the Force. To be honest, though, I can't really blame the writers for not having watched episode 7. Anyway, Manny and Sol fight for a while, and eventually Sol wins. Then May surprises him and steals his lightsaber. He doesn't kill Manny. As he's about to, she surprises and steals his saber. And then she says that she's not going to kill Sol, she's going to turn him into the Jedi. Then Osha comes out and asks Sol if it's true that he killed her mother, and he says yes, but doesn't explain, even though it's obvious that he should. Instead, he said that he wanted to tell her, but couldn't because he didn't want to hurt her. And he did it all for her because she was too old to enter the Jedi Order, and he wanted her dream to come true after everything she'd lost. Then she tells him to stop talking and force chokes him to death, though about halfway through that, while he can't breathe, he says that it's okay to kill him. I guess add the basics of how a human voice works to the list of things the writers don't understand. Oh, and Osha is holding Soul's lightsaber, and the Kyber crystal in it turns red because she's evil now. There's actually a scene where she holds it out at Manny, and then it's blue, but it turns red going along, even though the crystal's already red. Then Master Vernestra's ship flies overhead, so May, Osha, and Manny flee the scene. Well, May and Osha do. Manny hangs around for a bit. Once Master Vernestra gets off her ship, she senses Manny through the Force and exclaims in surprise that he's still alive. He quickly puts his helmet back on because it somehow blocks Jedi from reading his mind, despite him being able to use the Force just fine while he's has it on. Maybe it's a one-way filter. Anyway, Osha and May meet up at the Bunta tree. Osha apologizes for not believing May, and May apologizes for setting the fire, and they're reconciled now. Despite never having gotten along, and May being a cruel psychopath who tried to kill Osha. And even on the absurd consequentialist logic of this awful show, had May not tried to stop Osha from leaving at all costs, their mother and the Coven would still be alive. But, as I said, I can't blame the writers too much for not having watched episodes 3 and 7. They were quite bad. Manny shows up and points out that if he can find them, then so can the Jedi. Osha says that if he lets May go, she'll train with him, but May points out that the Jedi will use her to get at Osha. And Manny's solution to this is to wipe May's mind, and May agrees, so he does. Osha and Manny go off to Unknown Planet, and they hold hands as they look at the surf. Vernestra and a bunch of nameless Jedi extras go to the courtyard, and Vernestra uses the Force to quickly watch Episode 7. They actually play audio clips from Episode 7 as she's looking at various places to convey this. Then she goes home and issues a cover-up story to the Senate that Soul was responsible for every bad thing that happened, then killed himself. Oh, I missed an especially dumb scene, somewhere in the first half, where the senator, who has been calling for an investigation into the Jedi, meets with Master Vernestra, and he tells her that the Jedi claim to control the uncontrollable, their emotions. And one of these days, one of them is going to snap, and then who will stop him? I mean, all the other Jedi who didn't snap is the obvious answer. And what on earth is his alternative? All of the Jedi just running around with no organization, doing whatever they feel like with their enormous power? The character never thought this through, because the writers never thought this through, because they're idiots. And moreover, they're evil idiots. But more directly relevantly, they're not actually adults. They're just overgrown children. I've remarked on this many times, but to a young child, the world doesn't make sense. They can't imagine other people's motives or points of view. They can't really comprehend the future. In short, to them, stuff just happens, and figuring out that things happen for reasons, that there are causal chains, is something that will come later, as they grow and develop. Or, at least, that's what's supposed to happen. It's pretty clear that for Leslie Headland and her writing staff, that didn't happen. These are toddlers in adult bodies who have never realized that human beings have goals and motivations and a point of view and try to achieve their goals within the limits of what they know at the time. I mean, they don't even understand basic features of reality, like there's no air in space, stone doesn't burn, it takes time to travel to faraway places, things that burn down aren't still there, and people can't talk while they're unable to breathe. This would just be sad if the people had mental disabilities which prevented their brains from forming correctly, or, portions of their brains were removed in tragic accidents. What makes it interesting, in addition to being sad, is that none of that happened. These people have functioning brains. They just refuse to use them. They engage in magical thinking, but the curious part is that magic can be real if you use a relatively common tongue-in-cheek definition of reality. And that definition is, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away. It's fun and even sounds good when you check it against a few quick things, but it has a fatal flaw: group pretending. If you and several other people all pretend something together, that pretense doesn't go away if just one of you stops believing in it. So it can feel real. The I almost called the Acolyte. I almost called it The Last Acolyte. Is basically a bad writer being given $180 million to produce her worst early teenage years Star Wars fanfic. I mean, if you look at the symbolism of this episode, it's a teenage girl rebelling against the morals of her dad when she found out that he didn't tell her everything about his divorce from her mother in order to move in with the hot, abusive boyfriend that she stole from her sister, who believes will stop being abusive because he loves her. Or maybe he's a drug addict who will stop using drugs because of her. They could go either way on that one. It's a classic feminine power fantasy. Masculine power fantasies tend to be about physical power. Super strength, super speed, laser vision, the ability to lift things at a distance, whatever. While feminine power tends to be about social power. That's commonly a woman so hot that every man around her wants her, but it can equally be about a woman who inspires such love that a man will become good for her sake, or at least so completely devoted to her that he does nothing but good to her. Power fantasies without any attendant responsibility are common in fanfics by teenagers, and that's basically what we find here. But if everyone believes together that this is good, that shared belief doesn't go away when one person falters. It's kind of like how a chorus can keep a note going continuously, despite the individual singers needing to take breaths. If everyone will just believe together, then the magic will be real. And it's no coincidence that a common trope in the last several decades has been that magic works if you just believe hard enough. It's especially common in children's stories about Christmas, but you can see the same sort of thing in stories where the superhero's powers only work if they believe in themselves. Oh, I hate that phrase so much. I tune it out so automatically now that I can't be sure, but I seem to recall someone telling Osha to believe in herself. Belief as a creative act of the will is central to the entire modern project of trying to escape the hell of nihilism. It's sort of 1/16th-esque Nietzscheanism, but, truth to tell, Nietzsche wasn't actually impressive if you look at his life rather than his writing. And this is why the episode being so awful is interesting. Since the entire point is to believe through an act of the will, rather than to entertain a hypothetical in the intellect, making it believable doesn't matter. In fact, I think that we're getting to late-stage postmodernism, where making it unbelievable helps to filter out people of other faiths, like those of us who believe in reality. It ensures that the only people who will show up in fan groups are people who believe by act of will. And this attempt to escape the hell of nihilism is fundamentally social. This is part of why you so commonly see these kinds of people blaming those who don't affirm their beliefs for their own unhappiness. Like, I'm unhappy because you told me that my fantasy isn't real. That kind of thing. The most important thing is to find others who will all believe together, so that together you can make the magic real and escape hell. This is, and I think not by accident, the power of many. Just to be clear how this differs from the normal healthy relationship to stories. The normal relationship is that stories exist to help us appreciate the real world by showing us things that we find in the real world, except simplified. We see love and triumph and loss and friendship and hate and lust and love and greed and generosity laid bare within a pretend world where we skip 99% of the complicating factors. Real life is soaked in detail, and this helps us to appreciate the real things that we've experienced. In good stories, there aren't messages that could have been sent more cheaply by posting them on Twitter, or in the older thing, if you have a message sent, use Western Union, back when it was a telegraph service. In good stories, the structure of the story reflects the structure of reality. just more clearly. And we enjoy these stories because we recognize parts of reality that are hard to see in the grind of day-to-day life, and we want to share that enjoyment with friends because it's good, and we like our friends, and we want them to share in the good that we found. It's the same basic instinct as telling someone about a great place to look at the sunset, or a restaurant that serves good food. We found something good and want to share that. And that's true even if it's a story about bad decisions leading to unhappiness, or even that bad things happen to good people and we don't know why. Because that's true and worth appreciating. Finding something good is not the same thing as finding something fun. Anyway, a healthy fandom is about sharing the good that you found in the world outside you with others. The postmodern fandom is trying, as a group project, to create good in a fundamentally evil world. They're trying to march to the beat of an imaginary drummer, which is why it looks like they have no rhythm. And at the end of the day, the reality is they don't have any rhythm. I touched on this in my video on satanic banality, but the short version is if you live in your fantasies, you will necessarily be pathetic in the real world. So yes, this episode was awful, but it's quite telling that it was awful on purpose. Well, that's all for now about episode 8. I'm planning to do 2 more videos in my series on the Acolyte. The next one is going to be a series overview, where I consider all of the episodes taken together. And I plan to have some fun with how many things don't make sense now that it's complete, in addition to looking at it deeper, such as considering it, as it was pitched, Frozen meets Kill Bill. And then the final episode in the series is going to be Why Watch the Acolyte? And as a small spoiler, I'm going to mention Grand Admiral Thrawn. So, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.